So this is the most unhinged joerogan experience guest.
All right,
That
so we
was
have
it.
a wild story here. A former JRE guest who was just on the podcast only a month ago and was brought on
It is the Josh Dubin guy.
supposed to be an example of a reformed criminal who was mistreated by the system and received an unfair punishment for his crime, but he turned out to be an example of the exact opposite. And to say this podcast aged horribly is an
Is it being wronged by the system? I guess it is false.
understatement, because just recently this former JRE guest, Sheldon Johnson, was arrested for murdering somebody
This is Sheldon Johnson, okay.
and storing it in a freezer. And when he was on Joe's podcast, people were really skeptical of him, and they had a feeling he didn't change at all. Even though I don't think anybody expected it to be this bad, but people could definitely tell this guy was full of shit. Like this person says, this guy's a textbook thug. Some guys spend a lot of time in prison creating the perfect story how the justice system did them wrong and how what they did wasn't deserving of their punishment. They leave out or
So
revitalize
he just lied in the joerogan experience.
all the parts of their story which make them look bad. They also are hardened gang leaders and criminals, as Johnson was, so often good at manipulation. His life story, he told Joe, was packed full of appeals to emotion instead of valid explanations. And then they also go on to say they don't like how Josh Dubin operates himself, and that's the guy who brought Sheldon Johnson on Joe's podcast. He's a civil rights attorney who's been on there a handful of times to talk about criminal justice reform, and he usually brings on somebody who is wrongfully convicted, somebody who's actually screwed by the system. And the fans seem to enjoy those podcasts, so Josh should have just stuck to bringing on people like that, but instead he decided to push his luck with this last one, and now I think it's safe to say we never see him on Joe's podcast again. I mean,
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't invite him again.
he lost a lot of credibility here, if not all of it. You got to do a better job at vetting people, especially if you're bringing them on the biggest podcast in the world. I mean, Josh is obviously a terrible judge of character. He called Sheldon a miracle and a marvelous human being. And also on the pod, Josh kept trying to downplay Sheldon's crimes
Miracle, huh? Okay,
by saying he did 25 years for only 2 stitches.
It's pretty astounding how he was treated by the system. Another miracle sitting to my right, just like a marvelous human being who was basically
yes, when you don't have any research.
told by a judge, by an African American judge, that you don't matter, you don't count, and I'm going to throw your life
What's with the African American thing?
for a crime in which the victim received 2 stitches.
And you were in for 25?
25 years and 5 months.
For
Long
2
time.
stitches.
2 stitches.
No, conservatives really believe anything. Huh?
And I want to make clear one thing that has always struck me about Sheldon is his vulnerability, but also his honesty. He's like, he'll be the first to tell you out of the gate, I did it. He's not asking for a pass based on his conditions. What he's always said to me was, I just want people to consider how it may have impacted me. To me, you just can't ignore it. It doesn't say, well, poor Sheldon. I think that because I guess, I know him, the human being.
Yeah, well, apparently you don't. I mean, this could not have aged any worse.
Yeah, that's.
And like I said, even right when this podcast came out, a lot of the fans are like, how are we supposed to sympathize with this guy? He's a drug trafficker and committed multiple robberies, one in which a gun was involved. And somebody else is like, seriously, of all the innocent people out there that need help, this criminal gets a spotlight. And it is crazy. He had only been out of prison for less than a year, and he somehow managed to bullshit his way onto the Joe Rogan experience. And this proves just
It's actually pretty impressive. I'm
pretty
not
bad
gonna
at
lie.
sensing BS. But also, even if he did think Sheldon was full of shit during the podcast, I don't know if you'd really want to question him too much or call him out on it. But I don't think that was the case. I don't think he was scared to. I think he just put all his trust into Josh and figured he was vetting these people extensively, and he wouldn't bring on some guy that would go somebody
Yeah,
only
there's like no red flags, huh?
a month later. But also, like I showed, a lot of fans could tell this guy was full of shit. So Joe should have known something was up here. He should have been able to tell a little bit. Like also, just hearing this guy explain why he's arrested, he doesn't sound very remorseful. And even though Josh is like, he's so on to be the first
It
to tell
doesn't sound remorseful. I don't.
you he screwed up.
Yeah, I don't think you can tell by just on the words.
When Sheldon actually talks about it, it doesn't really sound like that. He's trying to rationalize it and downplay it and act like the system is the problem here.
And when I saw him, he had a bunch of jewelry on. He was with his girlfriend. She had a bunch of jewelry on. I said, hey, man, where's my money at? Oh, yo, I was going to pay you. So I robbed him. And I took his jewelry. And his girlfriend happened to be there. And
Yeah, there's a lack of remorse at
unfortunately, she got caught up
I
in
guess you can tell a little bit, I guess.
situation. I had a bunch of young guys with me, and they robbed her as well. And he got hit in the head with a gun right here on the side of his head, and he got 2 stitches. And they gave me 25 years for that case. Like I said, we go back to morals and values and principles and how warped they can be, right? In my mind at the time, this is a guy who I gave something to. He's living an illegal life. I'm living an illegal life. So as far as I was concerned at that time, it was fair game. In hindsight, as I moved on and I became more mature and I began to reevaluate myself, I realized how wrong that was. But that was later on. Another guy that I ran into, he also owed me some money. He owed me $7,000, and it kind of went along the same ways. He was selling drugs out of an auto parts store. Reading in between the lines and outside the margins without really going into all of the details, I robbed him because he owed me $7,000.
Did he get physically hurt?
No, he didn't get touched. got roughed up a little bit, but there was no physical, there was
Wrapped up a little.
no
Okay.
physical harm, nothing. Back to morals and values and principles.
So I guess there's no
Mine,
what?
he was fair game. He's selling drugs, I'm selling drugs, you owe me money, I came to take what you have. In that world, that was considered as permissible. These are one of the rules of something that was permissible in that world. Long story short, in December 1997, I get arrested. He just called me a menace to society, and he gave me 50 years.
Yeah, so you could tell he hadn't really given that life up. You know, he's acting like he was just doing his job, getting the money he was owed, and it's not that big of a
Yeah, that's surely, buddy.
deal. It's just how the streets work. So he feels like he was taken advantage of by the system. And there's another moment where I think you could definitely tell he hadn't changed, when he's talking about gang life and how he gave it up, and he said it benefited them because he's
I
the top
mean, this kind of easier on hindsight though.
guy and he was an authoritarian, he was really strict. And then he says it was to their advantage to get rid of me anyway. And once he says that, you can tell he's not over it. And Joe actually does ask him what he means by that. So I think maybe he did sense something here.
And I ended up getting into a school program. I got my GED. I left the gangs alone, which was a benefit for them because, you know, I was what you call an authoritarian. I was a rule guy. I'm still a rule guy. I like rules.
Still,
I like rules. I like structure. I like things to be a certain way. And it was to their advantage to get rid of me anyway. Plus, I knew a lot of the guys who were at the top.
Why was it to their advantage to get rid of you?
Because I was the type of person who would say, you doing that for what reason? Nah, you can't do that. The rule says that you can't do this, you can't do this. This is what the rules say.
And another giant red flag during this
actually, yeah,
podcast was the way he
he's sticking to the role that he created.
talked about his son getting arrested. You know, of course, this guy's son has been arrested, his dad has been arrested, his grandfather has been arrested, but then it's the system's fault. So the way Sheldon describes his son getting arrested, first of all, he uses it as an example of how quickly your life can get flipped upside down for such a simple mistake, as he describes it. And he acts like his son was just out minding his own business, and then he happened to get in a fight with somebody, and then they ran into the road and got hit by a car. But the real story is his son and his friend went out and tried to
This is the other people involvement with this guy again.
rob this guy, and they attacked him, and he tried to run away, or he was stunned or something, and then he ran to the road and got hit by a car and died. And again, this is something the fans picked up on right away. Like this person said, the way Johnson talks about the student whom his son tried to rob as an Asian guy or this Chinese guy is really jarring. He's more than just his race. He was a brilliant statistician whose contributions are still commemorated by the Columbia Statistics Department with an annual conference in his honor. But the way Sheldon describes it here, it's just like, you know, shit happens. Some Chinese guy ran the street and died. My kid got in trouble for it. And this is why Josh Dubin is completely delusional. You know, he's just talking about how vulnerable and honest this guy is.
Like my son, when he got into a fight with an Asian guy. They called him the Columbia law student killer, right? He gets into a fight with this Chinese guy.
A what killer? She's
Not to take away anything from that man's family, and you know, as a man, as his father, I felt some type of way. But the guy goes into the street and gets hit by a car. But this is how fast your life can change from just one simple mistake. From one mistake, and I just feel like, you know, a lot of times these conditions are created, and there's really no alternatives.
Yeah, so this is obviously really embarrassing for Joe.
no alternatives. Okay.
You know, this is not a good look, even though it is just crazy to look back on this podcast. You know, it does show how deceptive and manipulative people can be, and I'm sure it'll be studied in the future. But I don't know if this whole situation could have gone any worse. You know, and this guy, he had a good opportunity. He could have turned things around. He could have made a positive impact, but he just couldn't give up that life. And instead of proving that the system was flawed and he was being mistreated, he proved that the system had the right idea here. And now I'm sure this will be a setback to any kind of criminal justice reform. So Josh Dubin did the exact opposite of what he was trying to accomplish. So that's about it here. But make sure you guys go check out my page.
I guess they're upgrading that. This is an embarrassment for the joe rogan team to pick up on this. Should pick it up sooner.